We kick off our exit interview series as we look back at the players that contributed for Miami this past season and what they need to work on over the summer to keep their spot on the roster. Plus, the Heat aren't in the draft lottery, but that doesn't mean it doesn't impact what moves they might pull off. We break down why on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Heat, your everyday podcast on the Miami Heat. We're on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast apps Monday to Friday. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me is David Ramil. We are both Heat Media members. Today's episode brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. You can find us on YouTube. Please hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button if you're watching us there. Leave that 5-star rating if you're listening to the podcast. You can reach us, Locked On Heat, on Twitter. We're Locked On Heat on Instagram, LockedOnHeat@gmail.com. Before we start our exit interviews, let's get to the NBA draft lottery. Now, the NBA draft lottery is sort of the unofficial start of draft season for all of us sort of NBA draft casuals, David, the people that aren't paying attention, locked in all year because we're more, dealing with the NBA basketball. And I still haven't started my draft prep. We're going to get into our deep dives of the draft probably next month. But I am looking through the mock drafts last night after the draft lottery. By the way, the Atlanta Hawks go ahead and get the number one pick. I don't know if that's consequential to Miami, given that they're division rivals, that the Hawks could be making some major moves. I guess there's more time to get into that some other time, but I guess that's cool for Atlanta. So anyway, I'm looking through the mock drafts last night after the lottery, just sort of trying to see who the experts think that the Heat are going to take at number 15. So like you mentioned already at the top, the Heat not involved in the draft lottery, but a good time to kind of skim through the mocks. So I pulled 3 different mock drafts, and I just sort of want to open it up to discussion here. So the Ringer has the Heat taken Jared McCain, a guard out of Duke, with the 15th pick. Mm-hmm. ESPN has them taking Zach Edey, the Purdue center, who might be the most polarizing player in this draft based on some of the stuff that I've seen so far. And then Yahoo Sports has the Heat taking Isaiah Collier out of USC. Here's what the Ringer wrote about McCain. With Jimmy Butler, and this is from Kevin O'Connor, with Jimmy Butler on the rocks and Tyler Herro's continuing inconsistency, the Heat may need to rebuild their backcourt. A player as versatile as McCain could be a great place to start. He then goes on to compare him to Seth Curry, which is pretty interesting. ESPN, writing about Zach Edey, writes, Edey's positional fit alongside Bam Adebayo would be a topic of discussion in Miami, but his productivity, physicality, intensity, and team culture match would be welcomed by the Heat. Adebayo started slowly to incorporate a three-point shot into his offensive arsenal late this season and has the type of defensive versatility that could be useful alongside another big. Edey's offensive rebounding, interior scoring skills the Heat lack, making him an attractive pick here. That's from Jonathan Gavoni. And then Yahoo's Kristen Peak writes about Isaiah Collier. Collier didn't get a chance to find his rhythm at USC after dealing with an injury and chemistry issues with teammates. Bronny James? I don't know what that's a reference to. But he would be a steal for anyone outside the lottery. There are still questions surrounding his outside shot, but he's one of the best downhill guards in the draft. So of those 3, we could take it either way you want, David. The one that you like the most, maybe the most interesting, the most debatable. Where are you at?
Of those 3, not a lot of good options there, I think. I think if you were looking at what Miami needs, and at least this is my perspective, I think you have to draft size. Like, you'd want to be able to, though I looked at it this way, like Miami took a project in Niko Jovic 2 years ago. Last year, they took a much more ready plug-and-play player in Jaime Jaquez. This year, I think they go back to a developmental type player, but given where they're kind of lacking some area in terms of explosive athleticism, to me, I would be looking at explosive athletic big men that could be that next transcendent level player. Maybe a guy like, I don't know, Jalen Duren in Detroit or something like that. A guy that just brings incredible rebounding, athleticism, etc. And I realized Duren was actually a lottery pick, but when you look at Edey, slow-footed, kind of topped off in terms of athleticism and everything else. And yes, he developed nicely, and he provides that inside interior presence that Bam cannot. I just don't think he fits what Miami does schematically and in terms of their overall philosophy and defense. The guards are fine, and of the two, I'd probably lean more Collier because I think he's a guy who can, as he said in the draft analysis, get downhill, attack the basket, an area that Miami was lacking at all season. But I also don't think they're looking to add a guard, and it kind of shows what Kevin O'Connor knows about Miami, which is not to say not much, because if you're talking about rebuilding their backcourt, well, they kind of did that when I acquired not just Wright, but also they acquired Terry Rozier, who we'll talk about a little bit later this episode. So their backcourt is pretty much set. I don't know how many more changes they can make. Like, obviously, they're going to trade Tyler Herro or look to trade Tyler and maybe acquire a superstar like Donovan Mitchell. But if that move falls short, I don't think they're going to look at a 20-year-old guard that maybe can shoot okay and be like, yeah, you're the next point guard of our future, So to me, if they're looking to take a more developmental project, it's probably a big man. Somebody can provide athleticism at the center position and size that Bam got.
So there's a lot of things at play, and I think I agree with you. I think that you need to find size. Now, whether or not that size is at the center spot or not,
the wing,
we'll see. Maybe a wing, a power forward, even like somebody who could play in lineups with Bam and add some size. Because when you build around Bam Adebayo the way that they have, who's undersized as a center, you need to have positional size bigger size at other positions throughout the lineup to almost compensate for his lack of size. So if you could go find like a 6'11", 7-foot power forward, and I guess you've already got that with Nikola Jovic, but you want to keep kind of, that's not where you stop.
He could slide down to the 3 too, I think. Yeah,
sure, and wouldn't hurt to have somebody else, right? So you're not playing Haywood Highsmith at the 4 necessarily when Jovic isn't in the game. So
yes,
it is interesting the point you make about Kevin O'Connor going with Jared McCain, Kristen Peak going with Isaiah Collier here. But so you have 2 of the 3 people who, and I like all 3 of these guys. O'Connor, or not guys, Kristen Peak, but I like all 3 of these analysts because like O'Connor's a little bit more off the beaten path with his analysis. I think Gavoni is sort of like the standard. He's at ESPN. A lot of people listen to him. He's kind of going more chalk with Edey kind of being a middle of the first round kind of pick here, even though people are all over the board. There's people that think he should be a lottery pick. There's people that think he should be at the end of the first round, maybe even a second round pick because of his lack of mobility. And then Kristen Peak, who I think is maybe the most underrated person on the draft. She's been really consistently right with a lot of her mock draft picks over the last couple of years, going with Collier. But with 2 of these 3 analysts going with guards, is the idea that maybe the Heat are going to move off of a Tyler Herro or a Duncan Robinson or something like that and not get something like Donovan Mitchell back? Maybe they just move off of him. And by the way, that's totally possible. You can move, you can trade Herro or Duncan and address a different position, whether in the front court perhaps, right? Like that's also an option here this offseason. They're not limited to what they can do. So we'll see. I think at this point at number 15, you're looking for not necessarily upperclassmen, underclassmen, development. You're looking for somebody who fits your culture, who you think could be and provide value somewhere, right? Jovic provided value at that position. Jaquez provided value in terms of adding depth on the wing. We're gonna add value relatively quickly if you're looking to make the most out of this championship window. And I don't care if that player is 19 or 23. And by the way, I don't think the Heat care. They didn't draft Jaquez because he was 22. They drafted Jaquez because he, for whatever reason, he was ready to contribute right away, and that's something that they were looking for. And if a 20-year-old is ready to contribute right away, then they'll take a 20-year-old. It doesn't matter.
Yep.
So of these 3, the Collier one is interesting to me. The idea of getting a bigger, stronger guard with that level of athleticism to juice this team that lacks athleticism. Like even Terry Rozier is not supremely athletic, right? And he looked like a completely
for his
different,
size, yes.
For his size, and for he looked like a different person compared to Kyle Lowry, who was just so unathletic at 37 years old. That at least it was just such a stark difference. But in terms of having like that, nobody's doing what Anthony Edwards is doing right now for Minnesota, and nobody in the league really is doing that. But you get my point, right? Like there's nobody on the Heat that make you go, "Wow, what an athletic play that was." At least not in the backcourt. So, getting somebody like that with that raw athleticism is interesting in Collier. The Zach Edey thing to me, I keep going back and forth on this. I watched a lot of Purdue only because they went so far in the tournament that I ended up watching so much of them. The interior touch that he has is legit. That guy makes everything from 8 feet in. And that is something really that this Heat team does not have. And you're talking about value add. He adds that. Because Bam's touch around there is not what Edey's touch is. Bam, I think, is doing the most with the least amount of touch in that part of the floor. But then he also adds the 7-foot size. whatever 200. I think he's listed at 240 or something, which is a lie. He's probably 300.
Is he Walker Kessler like? I mean, I know you were a big Kessler guy coming into the draft. Is he Kessler like in that regard?
Kessler is a little bit more nimble and less touch.
Yeah, that's what I would think. Yeah.
So, but in terms of just being like, hey, here's a 7'4" guy who's huge, can rebound and score on the interior. That's all things that the Heat don't have, and you could argue need. Yeah. The problem is he able to stay on the floor long enough in order to add that value? Or is he going to be so slow of foot that he gets played off the floor? He gets pulled into every single pick and roll and whatever. Yep. Now, there's ways you can defend against that. You can have Edey shade off of the least threatening offensive player on the other team, and you can put Bam on the guy who's going to be most involved in the pick and roll switches and all that stuff. Like, there's ways to do that. But do you want to be compensating for a rookie whose value you don't really know? You don't know if that player is going to be able to thrive at the NBA. And now you're already designing game plans to compensate for that player. It's interesting. I don't know. I think Edey's NBA ready to add value right now. I would pick him at the end of the first round, and I wouldn't even blink because it's like, hey, at the end of the first round, who cares? You could just go get a big guy who could do something for you and be an option off the bench. But at 15, I mean, you're one pick out of the lottery. And so to your point, I do think you might be looking for more athleticism. Anyway, that's the deep dive. That's a quick sort of skim of the NBA draft. We're gonna do we're gonna do our full Blue Notebook series in June. We're gonna do our deep dives on all these guys. Basically in a few weeks we'll start doing that. I guess we got to start doing our research, David. I guess this is the part of the year where we start diving into this stuff.
I mean, look, there's something to be said about watching every game and seeing how they evolve over the course of a season. Not just that, but like a player like Jaime specifically, like he wasn't on any of our draft boards. Not really, because I think you know, obviously
on him.
I don't recall doing that, to be honest with you. I don't think we did. I mean, last year again, a little tough finals run. And then it's like the next day is the draft. I was like, okay, I'll take your word for it if you say he's good enough. This year, obviously, short playoff run, a little different, a lot more time to kind of settle into it and kind of figure out exactly what player pops out. And look, I mean, there are people who dedicate their whole careers to finding out those next prospects, and even then, it's a crapshoot. Yes,
yeah, it's a crapshoot. You're right. We debut our exit interview series next.
Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePick, America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats, and you watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks is the best way to get action on sports in more than 30 states across the country, including California, Texas, and Georgia. Quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. That's what makes PrizePicks the #1 fantasy sports app. It's really simple to play. You can make your picks and submit an entry in less than 60 seconds. Who doesn't love that? So download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get a first deposit match of up to $100. That's right, a first deposit match of up to $100, but only when you download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. Don't forget, PrizePicks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. All right, we are starting our exit interview series. We're going to hit every player on the roster. We're going to even hit head coach Eric Spoelstra. All this week, we're going to do all of it. Except for Jimmy Butler, who we basically spent all last week talking about. I think we got the gist of what's going on with Jimmy this summer. Everybody else, we're going to tackle them. Here's the idea. We're going to break every player into 4 different sort of mini parts, their exit interview in sort of 4 different mini parts. First thing, we're going to talk about their headline for the season. Our second thing is we're going to try to find out what Pat Riley told them in their exit interview in the meanest way possible. If we all remember, we recall Goran Dragic telling Haslam and Mike Miller on the OG podcast that after his first season, after Goran Dragic's first season, Pat Riley brought him into the office and just said, quote, "You need to be better. We didn't pay you for this, bleep." And that was basically Dragic's first interaction with Pat Riley after getting traded to Miami. Yeah. And so what does that sound like for every player on the roster? What's the meanest thing Pat Riley could say to these guys as they walk out the door? So that's our second part. Third part, was his season A, surprising? B, as expected? C, disappointing? Or D, inconsistent? And we're going to base that off of Flanagan's menu items. We'll divulge more on that as we get there. And then the fourth part, summer plans. Just what are we looking at for the summer? What's their big question? What do they need to work on? What's their priority? Kind of keep that one open-ended. So let's just jump right in to Tyler Herro, who we talked about a little bit earlier in the show.
Yep.
David, what was the headline for Tyler Herro's season?
Good, but not great.
Okay.
Short and simple to me. I just see it in, like he was supposed to take the lead. Like the idea again that Jimmy could play less of a role as he kind of saves himself for the postseason, and he had so much to prove after being out for all the entirety of Miami's finals run last year, and he had so much to show, and he showed nothing. Like nothing more than what he had done. Like I think there were small levels of growth in terms of his playmaking and maybe even his defense, which I give him 100% credit to. But when the opportunity was there to carry this team as the offensive player, the bucket getter, the scorer that he has been deemed from day one that he was supposed to be, he faltered. So good, not great.
Yeah, I've got great out of the gate, stumbled the rest of the way.
That's fine.
He's putting up career numbers the first couple months of the season, right? Points per game, passing, the shooting percentages, the free throw attempts, like everything were career numbers. And this guy looked great. And then he only ends up playing 42 games this year. The unfortunate knee hyperextension in New Orleans leads to knee and foot injuries basically for the entire second half of the year. He comes back just in time for basically that play-in push. The Heat stumble. He's a part of it. Then they go into the playoffs. They're going to the play-in tournament, excuse me. Jimmy Butler gets hurt. Kelly Oubre lands on Jimmy Butler's knee when Jimmy Butler pump fakes under the basket. Tyler Herro and Terry Rozier can't get over these neck injuries. And the next thing you know, Tyler Herro went from not playing any games because he was hurt to being the number one option on offense against the best team in the NBA in the first round of the playoffs. And that's sort of his season. So I don't know if it was too much too soon, great out of the gate, stumbled the rest of the way, but overall, that was sort of the year. It was another one marred by injury, and it just sucks with Tyler Herro because it feels like this is not a guy who deals with lingering injuries. The idea that he's somebody that just takes one game off, a couple games. He's not Kawhi Leonard, right? He's not like, okay, what is it now? Your hamstring's a little tight. Like this guy broke his hand diving for a loose ball in the playoffs last year, and then was rushing back to the other side of the court when he hyperextended his knee in New Orleans. And then because of that, the overcompensation, blah, 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 body, physical, medical stuff, ends up having that foot injury. And it's just like these two freak accidents that took away huge portions of the last 2 years for basketball for this guy.
I like what Riley said in the postseason press conference, that, you know what, he does not think that he's he mentioned fragility.
He said fragile, but that they're real injuries.
Yes, but exactly. And I don't think he's ready to call him injury prone. And the comparison to James Worthy having dealt with injuries earlier in his Lakers career, and then of course becoming a great Hall of Fame level player. Not to say that's the path for Tyler, but that sometimes you just go through a spate of injury and there's nothing you can really do about it. I don't think I'm ready to call him
physically.
No, he was a superstar.
I mean,
he was a superstar. He was Michael Jordan took a backseat to James Worthy at UNC. So the idea was the Lakers, again, a smaller league and everything else. They got a really good draft pick, and they let's get James Worthy to add to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and
the
Magic
reason
Johnson.
I bring that up is because Steph Curry dealt with a lot of injury issues early in his career.
Right.
The ankle injuries were a big deal, and
Right.
the Warriors end up getting him on a cheap contract, and that kind of sets the stage for that dynasty. But
Good point.
he has been really healthy since then, but he was a late bloomer physically. I remember talking to his trainer, Brandon Payne, and he's like, yeah, this guy was a late bloomer physically. When this guy was 30, he's where guys like Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, like physically just mature players were when they were like 26, 27.
Tyler could get there.
So I think one day Tyler could get there. So I think you and I agree on that. Also, just stop, figure out how to dive for a loose ball the right way, I guess. Like, don't lead with your hand. I don't know. I don't know what that part of it is. I don't know if he has to go full Tua Tagovailoa and learn how and takes
well, he weighs 175 pounds. I mean, that's basically what it is. I mean,
so that's where we're at with him. What does Riley tell him in the meanest way possible? What is it that Pat Riley says to Tyler Herro? He walks into his office. He doesn't say, you need to be better. We didn't pay you for this bleep, but maybe he does. I don't know. What does he tell?
No, he said, Tyler, you said a long time ago you thought you should be in the same conversation as Luke and Trae Young. Well, the only conversation now is that you're not half as good as they are.
That is the meanest thing he could say to him. Mission accomplished. All right.
I think that's fair. I mean, that's the idea is, again, the theme here is that, he's got to be better. It's not the pay or anything. I care nothing about the contract and whether or not contract worth and things of that sort. I think the idea is everybody knows he's a hard worker, and the fact that fans have turned on him as sharply as they have kind of denigrates what he's been able to accomplish and everything else as a mid-draft pick and everything, a mid-first-round draft pick. But he's a hard worker. He's had some tough injury. He still had the opportunity to be a superstar, or at least a star-level scorer that they expect him to be, and he hasn't reached it yet.
I don't think he will, and I think that's the problem. I think that's what fans, and I understand that Tyler Herro brings some of it onto him because he says things like, "I want to be in that conversation with Trae Young and Luka Doncic,"
and the bunny ears.
He brings it, and the bunny ears are fine. I don't care. But it's
are they? Where are they?
I looked those up. They're like $800. That's an $800 hat or something.
He can afford it. That's fine. I don't care.
He probably gets it for free anyway. But
even worse.
The point being, he did bring some of the expectations on himself. But that's what he's supposed to do. That's what NBA players are. If you don't think that an NBA player is ridiculously otherworldly, self-confident to the point of maybe even delusional, then you have not met an NBA player. They're all like that. It's just whether or not they say it in an interview or they don't. Right. But with Tyler, because he was so young and he said that, and I think because of certain expectations that were thrust upon him, in part because of his great rookie year in the bubble and all these things, fans have this expectation that he needs to be a superstar. He's never going to be a superstar. There are inherent limitations to what he can do physically, to the point where I would say this, and I think a lot of fans would balk at this, where I think he's basically maximized his abilities given his physical limitations. That's not to say that he can't get better. I'm just saying so far through his career, when he's been healthy, he has done the most with what he's got so far in his career. We saw in that playoff series that he can't be the number one against the number 2 defense in the league against the Boston Celtics. Hey, guess what? Not a lot of players are that. How many players could score? No help, no Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier. Who could be in that position that Tyler Herro was in and actually make that a series? 12 players in the league, maybe? I'm serious. What's the number?
I think Darius Garland was an all-star fringe player most of the season, and they've made him look like a non-factor. And maybe that's more about Garland than anything else. But I think, again, you can, the defense keyed on him, and he had a fantastic game too and everything else like that. I still think that ceiling for Tyler, and I think it's still realistic, is all-star.
Maybe a one-time all-star. Yeah, that's fine. Totally.
That's a great career. That's a great career. And so,
but not the number one guy.
They don't have that opportunity.
Not the number one guy on a championship team, and he was never supposed to be that either. And that, I think, is the problem. And that's why I think fans have maybe turned on him. But I blame expectations for that, right? And if we can all sort of settle in, maybe if this season did anything for Tyler Herro, it's bring the expectations back to realistic and just settle there. Because having a 20-point per game scorer as sort of like your sixth man, or you're just sort of extra juice scorer over here, is a really valuable thing to have, and a really valuable thing to find at the 14th pick, whatever he was picked at. So that's where he is. All right. Was his season surprising, as expected, disappointing, or inconsistent? We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. Go Cats!
Go Cats!
Go Cats! You know what? Miami Heat's playoff season is over, but to watch the whininess of the Boston area, that invigorates me. It's amazing. I know.
We're going to talk to Will Manso about it later this week, who was there in Boston covering the Panthers games for Bally. But yeah, I am. What a game!
So whiny.
Game 5, Tuesday night in Sunrise.
Yes, close them out, shut them out, send them packing, send them back to their whiny, pasty ass homes. Anyway, FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Can you bet on how many times Bruins fans will complain? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Was Tyler Herro's season surprising, as expected, disappointing, or inconsistent? This is how we're going to break it down. Each of these items, each of our little categories here, our labels, are going to be represented by a Flanagan's menu item. A Flanagan's menu item, as you see here on YouTube. We got the cup here.
For sponsorship opportunities.
We are.
Ding, 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 ding. Yeah,
even though I'm already giving you free sponsorship with the Flanagan's Cup there, but I'd love to get paid
for
something we're already doing. That's
just
true.
shows patronage. That shows patronage, not
Patronage.
the fact that.
Well, speaking of patronage, did I come up with this idea while sitting alone at a Flanagan's while my wife got her nails done for 2 hours on Friday afternoon? Perhaps. Who's to say? Shout out to the Davy Flanagans. Why was I in Davy? I don't know. It's my first time at the Davy Flanagans. Not a bad one. Not the best one. Anyway, I'm looking over the menu while I'm drinking a light beer, and this is what I'm thinking. What is the most surprising thing on the Flanagan's menu? I texted you this because I couldn't figure it out, but you had a great take on this.
Well, my former choice on the menu there when I used to go to Flanagan's and I used to eat meat was the blackened tuna hoagie. Delicious, little sprig of barbecue sauce on there, mushrooms, peppers, onions. You love it. I mean, you get a chicken Philly there. I think they have a cheesesteak sandwich.
They do.
You get the tuna hoagie. It's fantastic.
Well, that's where I was going first. Is the most surprising thing I thought was the chicken Philly, and then you hit me with this blackened tuna hoagie, and I was like, well, that is the most surprising thing I've heard all day. Well, other than what the conversation the couple next to me was having, but that's not part of this podcast.
Bonus episode.
Maybe you know what? I'll save that story for an episode where we have a little bit more time, because I think it's worth exploring my Flanagan's experience over multiple episodes. It was quite eventful. So the blackened tuna hoagie is surprising. As expected, we're going with rib rolls. So if your season was as expected, then your season was rib rolls. Rib rolls, we know what they are. You like them, maybe you don't like them, but they're exactly what you think they are. They're rib rolls. They're never going to be better than what they are. They're never going to be worse. They just are what they are. Disappointing. If your season was disappointing, your season is going to be considered potato skins. I think the Flanagan's potato skins are rather disappointing. Just going to be honest.
Had them, but I take your word for it.
There's better ones in places. And then if your season was inconsistent, then your season is going to be considered chicken wings, David. And this is where we might catch some heat, but I do think you and I agree. The wings at Flanagan's on Wings Wednesdays can be pretty great. Sometimes they can't be. They can be inconsistent. I think you agree with me on this.
I do. I remember having chicken wings that were, by definition, chicken wings by the narrowest of margins. They were more like charcoal briquettes than anything else. So you know what? That's that's not what I want. You don't want a lump of charcoal with some hot sauce on it. At least I don't.
So here we go. Tyler Herro, was his season blackened tuna hoagie? Did he have a rib rolls season? Was his season potato skins, or was his season chicken wings?
I think he was a chicken wing all the way, man.
Inconsistent.
Yeah.
I'm going to go potato skins. I'm going to go disappointing on this for Tyler, just because the injury, the way that the season started again, those career high numbers, it looked like he was really taking that step, finding a groove. There were times where it's like, oh wow, he's really doing this off ball thing. And I'm not going to dock him for the injury is where I'm at. He got hurt. It sucks. But I think that's maybe the biggest reason for his inconsistency was the injury. But overall, I think it was disappointing the way it just ended. And maybe partly his fault, partly not. The fact that he got hurt is disappointing too. So I'm going to go there. All right, summer plans for Tyler Herro. I think, let's go quickly on this. Add muscle, get bigger. And I think really lean into, and just maybe even just a visualization, a reset of his own expectations. Can you be an off-ball threat? His off the catch and shoot numbers are still Steph Curry, Klay Thompson levels of elite. If he just leaned into that and stopped trying to be in the same conversation as Luka and Trae Young and stuff like that, I think he would be really helpful. It would help if he was able to play next to somebody who was ball dominant and a driver of offense, which he basically has not had for 2 years, only because Jimmy Butler has been so chicken wings over the last couple of years. But it's, I think that's where I'm at. Okay, let's move on to Terry Rozier. Let's do it quickly. The headline for Terry Rozier's season. Miami.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what could have been? To me, that's because I think the idea behind his acquisition is one that everybody's kind of overlooking. And I know the draft now in hindsight looks like it might have been a bad one because he didn't play in the playoffs. But the idea was, and this was something that Miami needed all season long before his acquisition, was somebody who could put pressure on the rim. And that's what Rozier did. And sometimes those shots fall and sometimes they don't, but at least he was an offensive greaser of the wheel. Like, he made things a little bit more fluid for an offense that looked like it stank for 90% of the season. At least he helped and contributed in some regard to improve the offense, especially when he got into more of a groove. We just didn't get a chance to see what he would be like next to a healthy Jimmy Butler and a healthy Tyler Herro at the end of the season. So It would have been different had he been out there, but we'll never get that opportunity to see what he could have contributed.
What does Pat Riley tell him when he walks into the office? What's the meanest thing Pat Riley could say to Tyler Rozier?
We love what you brought to the table, but I gave up a goddamn first-round pick for you to be a little bit more Terry and a lot less scary.
I love it. This is my favorite segment. Tyler Rozier's season was rib rolls. I have it as expected, and it feels weird. I could go inconsistent. I can go chicken wings with this, but the injury part kind of just threw a whole wrench in it. So I think in the aggregate, there was moments like the end of that Cleveland Cavaliers game in Cleveland where he was hitting step-back threes and doing all this, the great scary Terry stuff, the stuff that you expected to see when he got here. There were moments where he was throwing lobs to Bam and running pick and roll and doing all that stuff. And there was also moments where he disappeared, and not just because of the neck injury, right? So I think it was inconsistent, but because of the injury kind of making it a little bit more complicated to make that evaluation. And it is. Yeah. That's a good point. It is who he's always been. So he's rib rolls. We got exactly what we sort of expected besides the neck injury. Summer plans for Tyler Rozier. What are the summer plans? Just get healthy.
He's got to get healthy. Like, he's not going to change. You know, he is not, I think, you pointed out his physical limitations, which I think is fair. He's a fine athleticism. And in terms of overall athleticism, even at NBA comparisons, like, he's fine. I don't think there's more to add to his game other than continuing to build on it and try to be more consistent. But he's also later in his career. That likelihood is not realistic. So get healthy and stay for a full season with Miami, training camp and everything else like that. If he can do that, I expect him to be more of a factor. He's not going to be Charlotte Hornets scary Terry. He's not supposed to be, and he shouldn't be here in this roster. That's because that Charlotte Hornets team was terrible.
Right.
This is different. So he has a role to play, and I think he understands it, and he can still be a very good, productive player.
Duncan Robinson, headline. He wasn't the most improved player in the year, but he was definitely the most improved player on the Miami Heat. That's sort of my big takeaway from Duncan Robinson's season. The way that it added the playmaking and all those things, getting to the basket. He is the most analytically driven player in Miami's offense. He told us on a show where he said, look, we got enough guys taking mid-range shots between Jimmy Butler, Tyler Herro, these other guys, Bam Adebayo, that he basically has limited his game to the three-point line and at the basket, the most efficient shots at basketball. And for a long time in his career, he didn't have that second part, the shots at the basket. Well, he has it now, in part because he's able to leverage that space that he creates from beyond the arc. He's able to attack those hard closeouts, get to the rim. I think Duncan Robinson has maximized what he's able to do, and I mean that in a very good way. A very impressive season, I think, for Duncan Robinson.
Absolutely. I no complaints about it. I think the fact that he showed more dimensionality, he was building off of last year's playoff success and continued it more consistently, even as people were recognizing this is something new to his game, or at least different. You know, it's not he was not the catch and shoot player that he had been for the early start of his career. And for him to continue to improve, I think shows continued work and development on his part. And it was a really overall impressive season to me.
I hate doing it for a friend of the show in Duncan Robinson, but what's the meanest thing Pat Riley could say to Duncan when he enters his office?
You know, I don't think he would go mean with him. He's like, look, you know, you got your contract. We're not going to trade you for the first summer since you got that contract. But what I said about availability wasn't just about Jimmy. Layups are nice, but what good are they if you can't make them in the goddamn playoffs?
Fair. I mean, the lower back injury was a tough thing for Duncan Robinson. When it comes to his summer plans, we'll just skip to that right now. You got to fix that lower back injury. Duncan did say if it wasn't for that lower back injury, really limited him. And I do think if the Heat had more players available, if Rozier was healthy and wasn't dealing with a very serious neck injury, and Jimmy Butler wasn't dealing with MCL, maybe Duncan Robinson isn't playing in the playoffs. I think Duncan's out there because the Heat absolutely needed him to. Yeah, at least not in the first round. So get that back better, come back, and if you just do exactly what you did next year, if you're Duncan Robinson, that is a win. That is a win at this point. Was his season a black and tuna hoagie? Was his season rib rolls, potato skins, or chicken wings?
Tuna hoagie, no doubt about it.
No doubt. Yeah, maybe the biggest tuna hoagie on the sandwich. Duncan Robinson. Yeah. Duncan Tuna Hoagie Robinson.
I think it's got wings. Well, legs or something.
got some legs. Maybe not wings. No. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app. Just to remember, a reminder, we have Will Manso on for our episode on Wednesday. Otherwise, the exit interviews are going on for the rest of the week. We are hitting every single player on the roster. So if we didn't talk about them today, we will talk about them another day. We'll also talk about Eric Spoelstra and give him an exit interview. All of that coming up this week on Locked On Heat.